Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 39 of the House Procedures Affairs Committee. We are meeting today at the request of 6 members of the committee to discuss the media report that the Chinese Communist Party worked to interfere in the 2019 elections.
And party teams for actually making this meeting possible. We don't usually meet today. And to Veterans Affairs Committee members for providing us their space. Before we start, a reminder also that all comments by members should be addressed through the chair. The clerk and I will maintain consolidated speaking lists of members wishing to address the committee. And I see Mr. Cooper would like to.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to move a motion, so it will be distributed to members at this time, and so that it can be entered into the record, I will read the motion. That given the global news report published by Sam Cooper on November 7, 2022, revealing that intelligence officials informed the Prime Minister and several cabinet ministers in January of 2022 that the Chinese Communist Party actively worked to influence the 2019 federal election, the committee extend its study of foreign election interference by 4 meetings to investigate this report. These meetings shall be scheduled immediately and override and be prioritized over any other business of the committee. C, the committee recall Elections Canada, CSIS, and the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Site Task Force to testify on the report referenced in A. D, the committee invite the Honourable Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and Minister of Infrastructure and Communities to testify on the report referenced in A. E, the committee invite the Honourable Melanie Joly, Minister of Foreign Affairs, to testify on the report referenced in A. F, the committee invite Jody Thomas, National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, to testify on the report referenced in A. G, the committee invite Vince Rigby, former National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, to testify on the report referenced in A. H, the committee invite David Morrison, former National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, to testify on the report referenced in A. I, the committee invite Dan Stanton, former CSIS officer, to testify on the report referenced in A. J, the committee invite David Mulrooney, former Canadian ambassador to China, to testify on the report referenced in A. K, the committee invite Dennis Molinaro, former CSIS analyst, to testify on the report referenced in A. And L, the committee order the production of 1. All relevant briefing notes, memorandums, and documents presented to the Prime Minister and members of Cabinet referred to in the report, and 2. All relevant memorandums, briefing notes, and documents concerning Chinese Communist Party interference in Canadian elections, which are in the possession of the Prime Minister's office, the Office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Office of the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Infrastructure and Communities, the Office of the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and the Office of the Minister of Public Safety, provided that 3. These documents be deposited within 1 week with the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel. 4. The Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel shall promptly notify the committee whether the office is satisfied that the documents were produced as ordered, and if not, the chair shall be instructed to present forthwith, on behalf of the committee, a report to the House outlining the material facts of the situation. And 5, the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel shall make redactions to the documents to protect the identities of employees or sources of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service or allied intelligence agencies as soon as reasonably possible, provide the redacted documents to the clerk of the committee to be distributed to all members of the committee in both official languages. So that is the contents of the motion. And Madam Chair, this motion arises from the very troubling global news report by Sam Cooper of November 7th.
Point of order,
that
Madam Chair.
the
Sorry to interrupt, but if the member is going to speak to the motion, if the member is going to speak to the motion, it'd be helpful if we actually had it in front of us. Is there a copy?
So I understand it has been circulated. Are you asking for a paper copy?
Well, yes, I don't have it. It hasn't been
have
sent.
paper copies.
In both official languages,
Yes,
Mr.
in both
Cooper?
official languages.
Could you please give them to the clerk?
May I continue?
Just let it go. I'll give you your time.
There was a virtual option. Actually, I was going to fly tonight. I was going to stay home today.
And Mrs. Romanato and Mrs. Sahota, can you just give me a nod to confirm that you have it in your email? Excellent. With that, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The motion before us arises from the very disturbing global news story by Sam Cooper of November 7th, which detailed that the Prime Minister and several members of the Cabinet have been briefed as early as January of this year by Canadian intelligence officials about a vast campaign of interference in our democracy by the Chinese Communist regime, including during the 2019 election campaign. Let me just say at the outset, but I want to be very clear, that we are talking here about interference by the Chinese Communist regime. This has nothing to do with the people of China, with Chinese Canadians. It is specifically in regards to actions by the Chinese Communist regime, of which the Chinese people are victims of that totalitarian regime. Madam Chair, the briefings from CSIS are alarming in terms of the sophisticated campaign by the Chinese Communist regime to subvert Canadian democracy, including the funding of a clandestine network of at least 11 candidates through Chinese Communist intermediaries, corrupting political financing laws to advance the interests of the Chinese Communist regime, in placing agents in campaigns to direct, control, and influence candidates. The scope of the interference goes beyond that. It includes placing agents in MP offices to influence policy, corrupting Canadian officials to advance the interests of the Chinese Communist regime, and mounting an aggressive campaign to harass, intimidate, and politically undermine elected officials who the Chinese Communist regime believes who do not share or align with the interests of that regime. There are also some alarming revelations about the role that Chinese consulate offices in Canada are playing to interfere in our democracy and in our elections. For example, according to the briefs, the Chinese consulate in Toronto directed the funding of at least $250,000 to this clandestine network of candidates in which the funds were distributed through proxies of the Chinese Communist regime. It was also the Toronto consulate that directed a campaign worker to prevent a candidate from meeting with certain officials, including representatives from Taiwan. And beyond the 2019 election campaign, according to the briefings, the consulate in Toronto has been directing significant sums of money, potentially millions of dollars, to interfere in our democracy, including allegedly $1 million that was transferred from the Chinese Toronto consulate to proxy groups, which in turn organized protests in support of the continued partnership between the Toronto District School Board and the Chinese Communist regime's state-funded Confucius Institute. And the briefs further outline that President Xi's United Front operates through consulates in Canada, from which officials direct funds into Canada's political system using Chinese Communist regime proxies. So these are very alarming reports, and given what the Prime Minister was evidently briefed on, this would demonstrate interference by the Chinese Communist regime in not one, but two consecutive federal elections, because we know of significant Chinese Communist interference in the 2021 election, interference that was detected by the Rapid Response Mechanism Canada of Global Affairs, which observed Communist Party media accounts on Chinese social media platforms spreading disinformation specifically targeted at conservative candidates. So, in the face of these very serious instances of interference by the Chinese Communist regime as part of what appears to be a very sophisticated campaign that involves intimidation of elected officials, involves corrupting former officials, involves corrupting elected officials, and involves an effort to influence the outcome of not one but two elections to serve the interests of the Chinese Communist regime. Canadians deserve answers. We need to get to the bottom of this interference. And it is disturbing that the Prime Minister was briefed about this, and members of his cabinet were briefed about this earlier this year in January, 10 months ago, perhaps sooner, and yet nothing appears to have been done on the part of the Prime Minister or on the part of the government. Despite evidence of interference by Chinese consulate officials, no one has been expelled from Canada. No one has been charged There are no apparent investigations being undertaken, and there has been no action taken on the part of the government to respond legislatively, even though Canadian officials, CSIS, former CSIS officials, or former ambassador to Canada, David Mulrooney, stated that Canada is more exposed than other Western democracies to Chinese communist interference. And so, in light of that, the motion before us is a straightforward one. Elections fall within the purview of CROC. We are undertaking a study on election interference, and given the alarming report, it is incumbent upon this committee, pursuant to our mandate, pursuant to the study that we are currently undertaking, to expand the study, to hold at least 4 hearings, so that we can hear from the appropriate agencies, to hear from ministers who may have been briefed, to hear from the current and former national security advisors of the Prime Minister from the time of the interference in the 2019 election campaign through to the time that the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet were briefed, and to hear from others, including former CSIS officials and our former Ambassador David Mulrooney, who can provide insight into our exposure, our vulnerabilities, and who are in a position to provide recommendations on how those vulnerabilities can be addressed, and to ensure going forward that our security, intelligence, and law enforcement agencies have all of the legal tools and all of the resources necessary to combat this kind of interference. This interference is simply intolerable. It is unacceptable. Canadians and Canadians alone ought to decide the outcome of elections free of foreign interference and free of this kind of corruption that is being advanced by the Chinese communist regime, with witting and unwitting actors, according to the brief. So we need to know what the Prime Minister knew and why he has failed to act to address this interference. This motion is a starting point in that regard. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. On my list, I have Mr. Berthold, suivi par Mr. Fergus, puis Madame O'Connell, Madame Blaney, et Madame Gaudreau. Mr. Berthold, à vous.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank my colleagues for making this emergency meeting possible on a topic that is a very hot topic. It concerns Canadians a great deal. And why is that? It's because Canadians have a right to safe elections, and elections have now been threatened with the allegations made by Global News on the 7th of November that said that the federal elections of 2019 involved some Chinese interference. In fact, they may have been funded as well by them. There was a study that we had already started on foreign interference in elections in Canada. And bear in mind that the committee had already started a study on foreign interference for the elections of 2021. We had had very clear information that there had been interference in the Canadian elections. We had heard information from CSIS They explained to us what measures had been implemented to recognize foreign interference. And since the election of 2021, there hasn't been much time that has elapsed. So we have to determine what will be done to prevent this. The article that appeared on the 7th of November reminded us that there was interference back as far as 2019, and people knew that there was foreign interference in 2019, and that completely changes the scope of the study we are carrying out on foreign interference, because we are going to recall some of the witnesses that were called back then to tell us more about what happened in 2019, who knew what was going on, what ministers were informed, and what actions were taken by the government to ensure that between 2019 and 2021 there wouldn't be any interference by the Chinese Communist Party. We owe it to Canadians to ensure that the democratic process is beyond any suspicion, and especially beyond any foreign interference by any foreign entity around the world, and in particular the Chinese Communist Party, which is the case at hand. There are people in China who are victims of that surveillance, that interference, and Canadians have a right to express their views without feeling any pressure and intimidation by the regime that is currently in place in China. So we have to do all we can to shed light on the allegations that were made in the global news. We are going to have at least 4 meetings. We are going to call back members from CSIS, people from Elections Canada, so that we can hear their testimony on this article by Global News. We are also going to call Dominique Leblanc, Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Infrastructure and Communities, Honourable Mélanie Joly, Minister of Foreign Affairs, also Jody Thomas, a National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, Vince Rigby, former National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, David Morrison, a former National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister, Dan Stanton, former CSIS officer, David Mulroney, former Canadian Ambassador to China, Dennis Molinaro, former CSIS analyst. Madam Chair, we will invite those individuals to shed some light on this matter. We are also asking that a certain number of documents be tabled so that we can look at the circumstances surrounding this foreign interference by the Chinese regime in our elections. As I said earlier, who knew about this? Who was made aware of this? How was this interference unveiled? And why didn't we know anything between 2019 and 2021? Why didn't Canadians know about this? And more importantly, why did the Prime Minister not do anything to protect the 2021 elections from the interference that occurred in 2019? So I think we owe all this to our voters. And for that reason, I'm going to support the motion tabled by my colleague. It is important to do so that we shed all light possible on the parliamentary process, or rather, the democratic process. I tried to combine 2 words there in French, so it came out very strangely. So we are talking about the democratic process. Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope my colleagues will support this motion so that we are going to be sure of the situation with the next upcoming election. Thank you very much, Mr. Fergus. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to thank my colleague and my colleagues who signed this letter about this very important matter, because it is an important matter, Madam Chair. We are all extremely concerned about the interference of foreign governments in our political affairs here in Canada, and especially when we read about what the Chinese government was doing. There is a huge consensus around the table. Madam Chair, this is exactly why we had made this study a priority. We had already made this a priority in our committee. We had huge agreement on this, and I would say this represents the best of our parliamentary tradition, that is, to finish our study on the parliamentary precinct and then start the study on the hybrid functioning of our parliament to see if we wanted to continue to operate in hybrid mode. And we've already started the study of political interference. We had already agreed that we would have meetings on the topic. I fully agree that we are going to have 4 additional matters on that topic. So, Madam Chair, I hope that you will forgive me for a moment, but I was wondering where the fire was. Because we had already agreed to study this. We have agreed that we are going to extend the number of meetings. So I'm not sure why we actually moved a meeting of the Veterans Affairs Committee, because we had already planned to have a meeting of our committee to discuss this matter. I must say that with all these requests for additional witnesses, for the production of briefing notes, memorandums, etc. Well, look, I don't really have a problem with this, but this isn't the right place to produce those documents. Now that the official opposition are part of the Security Committee, the NSICOP, that's where they can get all of the documents. Sorry, redacted. All of those documents don't have to be redacted. Once again, I hope, I'm talking as a reasonable person here. I think I am a reasonable person, but it seems to me that the idea behind what we're trying to do is fine, it's perfect. But we want to ensure that the documents that are produced are shared with parliamentarians so that everybody has a good idea of what's going on. And that is why I would like to thank the official opposition for accepting to be part of this meeting. After not being part of this for quite some time, I think it is a good idea that they have decided to join. Congratulations. They are now part of NSCOP. And thanks to that, we can have all of the documents that will be presented in unredacted form because we now have a system that works very well. It's a secure system that ensures that we can actually do that. Madam Chair, there's one thing that really concerns me about this motion. Just one thing. As I said, I support the idea. I like the idea of the production of documents, but to the right place. But what I don't understand is why we have to have these meetings immediately and they will take precedence over other topics. We're just about to finish 2 studies. In fact, we already have the draft of one of them in our inboxes, and it's just going to take one more meeting to finalize it. It will be an in-camera meeting.
See the emergency on this, given that we had, this is the stories referring to the 2019 election, given that we've already started the study on this exact issue, and this is the reason why they're asking for an additional 4 meetings, which I think is I think it's perfectly fine. But to displace the other 2 studies that we had come to a really, I think, a very parliamentary decision that we came to in the best traditions of Parliament for us to come together and to agree on that. We're just about to finalize these 2 committee reports. I'm not certain if I see the fire that would require us to put off those 2 committee reports, which can be solved in effectively 1 week calendar time and perhaps 2 or 3 meetings of this committee's time. And then we would go on to do what Mr. Cooper and Mr. Berthold have suggested that we should do. So, Madam Chair, I am keen on introducing a sub-amendment to this, but I would like to hear from my colleagues, ma collègue du Bloc québécois.
My colleague from the Bloc québécois and from the NDP, before I table that motion. But I'd just like to indicate that I'd like to have my name put on the list so that I can speak after all of the other speakers on the list. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I am also sure that you would like to hear from Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you to my colleagues for bringing this motion forward, but it's nice to see the Conservatives have finally woken up to foreign interference and finally want to make this a priority. They refer to the media stories, but I refer them, Madam Chair, to the House of Commons, where they sat and had a 2019 NSICOP report on this very subject tabled. Why were they, before the 2019 election, before the 2021 election? I'm looking at it right now. Some of the, in the public version that they could have accessed, the information that was there. Where was the sense of urgency then? The Conservatives have sat on their hands when it comes to fighting foreign interference and ensuring that our democratic institutions are upheld. I mean, they stood outside these doors and stood with convoy members suggesting that the entire government be overthrown. So where were they on protecting our democracy then? I have no issues with continuing this study. In fact, our members have been actively engaged in continuing this study. So I think this is, well, I have no issues with moving forward. I think Canadians should be very concerned with some of the rhetoric that we hear from Conservatives when it comes to foreign interference. Like I said, is this an attempt to kind of rewrite history of their attempts to overthrow democratically elected governments and their support of those types of movements? which Canadians have overwhelmingly rejected. Madam Chair, in the context of this motion, having more meetings and more people attend, I don't think you needed to cancel Veterans Affairs Committee to continue a study we're already doing, especially right after Veterans Week. But that's the Conservatives standing up for our members who served this country. They don't accept yes as an answer. We're doing this study. You want more witnesses? Let's have more witnesses. I don't see why that's a problem. There are reports tabled in the House of Commons in 2019. And what was the Conservative reaction to the work NSICOP was doing on this? They pulled their members off. They pulled their members off of NSICOP. So if Conservatives are truly concerned about foreign interference, they had ample opportunity to continue to do that work. But instead, they took their toys and went home. Madam Chair, in addition to that, I think Canadians should hear, disguised within a motion that seems very reasonable in the sense of wanting to address foreign interference and protecting our democracy, there were a couple little tidbits that I think Canadians should be very alarmed about. One, where is the mention of other foreign countries or bad actors of foreign interference? In the 2019 NSICOP report, in addition to what we heard testimony here, there are other countries engaged in foreign interference. The Conservatives are only focusing on China, and it makes me wonder why. If you want to defend our democracy, if you want to ensure that we have all the tools available to ensure that our elections are upheld and not interfered with, why don't they talk about Russia? Is it because our testimony we heard on this study was that Russia was targeting Liberal members? Madam Chair, let's pinpoint something Mr. Cooper said. He said China and the reports were that they were targeting Conservative candidates and influenced the outcome of the elections. I read those media reports. I didn't see it saying it targeted Conservative members. It targeted candidates. And if the members opposite have evidence that only Conservative members have ever been the focus of foreign interference, I would welcome them to table it. They've only mentioned one race that they feel has been influenced. But in these reports, they talk about, I think, something like 11. So disguised in this motion to take a very serious issue and continue to study it and push for strengthening our democracy, the Conservatives are disguising their real intention here, which is when they lose, it's China's fault. And when they win, it's because they have won. It reminds me of former President Trump. During the midterms, he said, if Republicans don't do well, it's their fault. But if Republicans do well, it's because of him. And that's precisely what I'm hearing when it comes to foreign interference. And this is precisely what foreign bad actors want. They want Canadians to mistrust our democracy, that when certain candidates lose, and may I remind you that they refer to Mr. Chu constantly in terms of this study and his election outcome, but he was rejected in 2015. So he was rejected once before, then supported, then rejected again. So I have no issue studying foreign interference. In fact, it's something I'm quite passionate about because I do think we need to make sure that our institutions are, excuse me, I know it must be hard to listen to a woman and not be able to control your emotions, but I sat quietly while you spoke, Mr. Cooper. So while I am passionate about studying this topic because I think it should be something every Canadian should be aware of, but let's not use this as a guise to suggest that when Conservatives lose, it's foreign interference. And by the way, only one country, they don't bring up the other countries that have been cited by CSIS and others in the public record. So I find that troubling. I would like to expand this to ensure that we're looking at all targets and all actions that are taken where we can, and how we then support democracy so that Canadians have trust in our institutions. I do not want to get into the U.S. rhetoric of rigged elections, and this is what we're heading down. Like, let's stay focused on protecting our democracy and ensuring that our security agencies have the tools they need. I want to have that conversation. I think we should hear about what's been happening in this space, how we're going to protect these institutions. But if we're going to have it under the guise of just, certain parameters that Conservatives think benefit them, then I think we're actually feeding right into what foreign state actors that behave in this activity want, which is mistrust in our system. So I have no issues bringing more people in, having more conversations, having more meetings. But the Conservative awakening that this is a problem is actually astonishing to me, because we've had multiple reports tabled in the very House where many of them sat in 2019, and I'm sure before. So the other point I would throw out there, and perhaps I'll wait until I hear from other members, but I'd like to know how all of our government did introduce briefing of political parties in advance of elections on foreign interference, the threats. And I'd be very curious, if other parties were not engaging with their candidates on how to prepare for this, how to protect themselves, security measures, things like that. Perhaps we should have those conversations with party members and party leadership who would have also been briefed, something that was new and implemented by our government to ensure that going into elections that parties have information and can help protect their candidates and ensure that their candidates know what to look out for. So I think that's something that the Conservatives have missed in their drafting, but I'm happy to have that conversation. So like I said, I'm happy to move forward. I think there are some concerns, once again, in terms of the production of documents and the Conservatives' continuation of not understanding how to properly handle documents of national security. But I'm sure we can figure out a solution in terms of how to have that information. I'd suggest they don't pull their members off NSICOP again if they want access to national security information. But I mean, time will tell on the leadership of what they actually take seriously. But in terms of foreign interference, the seriousness, we've been working on this. We've been talking about this. So I'm glad the Conservatives woke up and are now taking it seriously.
Thank you. Mrs. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I just want to remind all the members that I was one of the people that signed this ask for an emergency discussion as well. And so I really appreciate our differing opinions, and I think it's always important to have space for that. But I just want to recognize that. And I also just want to mention that we should not be heckling in committee. It really disturbs me. It is about having civility. These are hard issues that we're facing, and we should disagree. That's important for democracy, but how we disagree is important. So I just want to put that 2 cents into this. Now, the reason I signed to have an emergency meeting is the fact that this did just recently come out, and I think it does behoove us all to take it seriously. We've heard from testimony just in the last couple of weeks for something that matters a lot to me, which is there isn't really good strategies around supporting rural and remote communities to make sure that they are not getting intense disinformation, and that is directly linked to having strong local media. We heard very clearly that Indigenous and ethnic communities across this country do not necessarily have a strategy. So we need to pick up on some of these things. And we cannot have interference at this level. We know it's becoming more realistic. We know that it is happening more and more frequently. So it makes sense to me that our committee would push this study out a little bit to have that further and specific discussion around what is happening around China. We've heard that the Prime Minister has been briefed on this. We need to see what's happening on our level as well. But I do have a few concerns with this motion, and I would like to talk to them, and hopefully once Mr. Cooper is on the list again, he can respond to some of these. I feel a little concerned that we're getting ahead of ourselves and that there are too many witnesses and it's not giving our committee leeway to focus in on revelations. So I am supportive of going all the way for participants in the committee from C to F. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I would like to hear from them and then decide what next witnesses we should have. And usually our process is to have parties put forward witnesses. So I'm not saying these folks shouldn't come, but I just don't want to limit ourselves only to this when we are not able to respond meaningfully to any revelations or things that we learn. I also think that it is important that the subcommittee is meeting tomorrow, that we look at what the plan is moving forward. We know we just have a few weeks left in the House. There are a few reports that are still on the table, so I have concerns with B. I think it should be a priority for the committee, but I think it would be best if the subcommittee met, went over the schedule, and brought something forward for the whole committee. As we all know in this circle, the whole committee agrees. So the subcommittee does that work, and the whole committee agrees moving forward. So I think that would be the best step to take. So I hope that I'm not proposing anything particular here because I would like to hear feedback before I do that. I'm also concerned about the 1 week. It just doesn't sound feasible. When I look at the production of paper, it usually takes quite a bit longer, up to 30 days. So I don't want to put undue stress on the people that work so hard for us when they can't get that done. So I think we should have a discussion about that. The other thing is, I think it is really important that we protect potential whistleblowers and that we are protecting the people who are coming forward. So I think it's worth a discussion of where it belongs. Does it belong in this committee? Is that going to be the best place for it? Should it go to NCCOP? I don't have a decision made on that, but I think it's an important thing because we do not want information getting out into the public realm that is going to put our elections more at risk. And so I need to have some assurances that the process, so maybe we need to discuss that more fulsomely. So those are just some of the thoughts that I have, and I just hope that we can figure this out together because these are really, really important issues. Canadians need to trust in our systems. I hope that all of us have that commitment as we're having these discussions, and we also know that that is the role of our committee. Our committee is really to focus on the procedures to make sure that they're clear for Canadians and that Canadians have trust in them. So as we look at this, I think it's important we stay within our lane, and if we think that there's more work that needs to be done on some of these issues, we may need to discuss if it needs to go to the Canada-China Committee. So I want to hear thoughts from Mr. Cooper on this, and that's all I have at this time.
Well, that is timely because it's Madame Gaudreau, suivi par Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Boudreau, Ms. Goudreau, rather, followed by Mr. Cooper. Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot of issues have been presented here. I just want to summarize a little. We all agree around this table that we should shed more light on this. The first meetings that we had as a committee were to determine whether there was any foreign interference in Canadian elections. The answer was yes. Do we have enough information? The answer to that is no. Are we accountable to our Canadian citizens, the electors, and the democracy that we have to protect? Yes. Do we have enough time? Well, tomorrow we're going to talk about all this because we just have 5 weeks before the end of this session. I'd like to tell all members of this team that we took the initiative to carry out a study on a possible permanent hybrid government. We did this preemptively because we just have to give an answer in June. So I'm looking at this from the outside. I put myself in the place of a voter who asks himself, do I have all of the information I need to make sure that everything is secure and safe, especially based on what was revealed by Sam Cooper on November 7th? And I think the answer is, well, I'm not really sure. So here we are wanting to have 4 more meetings with the people that are mentioned here at this committee. That will allow us to determine how to go further. We've heard about national defense. We've heard also about the fact that perhaps we don't have all of the information we needed. Our committee must carry this out to the very end. We have to strike while the iron is hot. We've already started this. We have to finish our work. And that is why the Bloc Québécois signed this motion. And I would hope, because I've spent too much time already, but I would hope that within an hour we will manage to vote on this so that we don't waste the time of other committees and that we can conclude this matter as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Mr. Fergus is correct. It is a very important matter. It is one in which there ought to be consensus on. Unfortunately, listening to some of the rhetoric from some members on the committee, it would appear that there is no such consensus, which is very disappointing. I would note that although it is not new that the Chinese Communist regime, along with Russia, Iran, and other foreign state bad actors, have interfered and are interfering in our democracy, in other aspects of Canadian society, what is new are certain facts pertaining to the funneling of at least $250,000 directed by the Chinese consulate in Toronto to at least 11 candidates about a coordinated effort to install agents within campaigns to try to control the activities of candidates, including who they meet with, placing agents in MP offices, corrupting Canadian officials, and mounting an aggressive intimidation campaign against elected officials. And we have learned, again, what is new is that the Prime Minister was briefed about this and members of his cabinet in January of 2022. And what we know or believe to know at this time is that no one has been expelled, no charges have been laid, no investigation has been opened, and that no action has been taken by the Prime Minister. And in the face of these very serious instances of interference, directing funds to try to influence the outcome of an election in 2019, it is incumbent that we get to the bottom of this and that we do it in a transparent way. There doesn't appear, based upon the comments that I've heard from my colleagues, any real objection to the contents of this motion. A point was raised more than once about issues around production of documents. And let me say that at this time we don't know what those contents are. And so it's premature to prejudge that. But what the motion provides for is that the law clerk, who has a full national security clearance, go through and undertake appropriate redactions due to national security or other considerations. So I think at this point in time, given that there is much we don't know, it's quite appropriate to leave it in the hands of the law clerk. If the law clerk identifies issues, I'm sure the law clerk will flag those, and we as a committee can respond accordingly. But with respect to this motion, it is around an issue based upon new revelations, based upon briefings the Prime Minister and his cabinet had. We need to do this in an open and transparent way, and that's what this motion offers. It provides an appropriate list of witnesses. It's not unreasonable, I believe, in the face of these very serious allegations, to hold 4 more meetings and to do so as expeditiously as possible, all within the context of this broader study that we are undertaking relating to election interference and foreign interference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I've listened very quietly, patiently here to all the arguments being made, and I appreciate all the comments of everyone on the committee. Certainly, from my perspective, any foreign interference in our elections is of concern, and that's really why members on this side all supported the original motion to study foreign interference in our elections in the first place, because we do feel it's important. I agree with Mr. Fergus, though. I don't see the fire in terms of the need for a 106.4, considering we were already engaged in a study on this topic, which easily could have been extended through a good faith discussion as we've done before. So I'm not sure what precipitated this particular meeting or need for an extra meeting, which obviously disrupts other committees' schedules. Regardless, I think I'd like to make a few comments related to some of the arguments that I've heard, because I feel I need to correct a few things. Based on testimony that we heard, I wasn't actually at the meeting, but I've read the notes. Mr. Marcus Kolga had said, and I'm going to quote him, in 2014, those accounts, he was referring to the Russian government and Twitter accounts, those accounts were actively doing the same. They were attacking the Harper government on various different issues. They are agnostic of any sort of political party. They will sink their fangs into the left and the right, and they will tug any specific issue until it tears us apart. This is what they do. It doesn't matter who's in government, whether it's the Conservatives one day, the Liberals the next, the NDP another, and perhaps the Bloc one day. All of the parties, even when they're in opposition, are subject to these types of attacks. So I think it's important for us to recognize that all of the parties, no matter which party is in government, is under equal vulnerabilities in terms of foreign interference. I think that's important. I would also just quote from the November 7th Global News article, and Mr. Cooper unfortunately spoke to only Conservative candidates being targeted. In that article, and I'll quote it, the briefings did not identify the 2019 candidates, but the alleged election interference network included members from both the Liberal and Conservative parties, according to sources with knowledge of the briefs. I think it's important for us to put that on the record as well.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Just to correct the record, the comments that I made specifically with respect to Conservative candidates were based upon the information that had been gathered by the Rapid Response Mechanism Canada at Global Affairs pertaining to the 2021 election campaign.
Sounds like debate.
Well, I'm just clarifying. So, because the comments of the member are misleading based upon what I had stated.
So I've had a couple of mentions from colleagues just as to the way we handle ourselves. We are time limited. Committee cannot proceed after 1 o'clock because of limited resources. So you get to use your time. And it sounds like everyone is saying this is an important topic. So let's have
Madam
an
Chair, I
important
wasn't finished my
conversation. Mr. Turnbull, would you like to finish your comments?
Yes, thank you. Just to go back to what I was saying, and I will go back to Mr. Cooper's opening remarks on this just to double check the record afterwards, but thank you for the point of clarification from him. I also wanted to mention that despite the fact that clearly, based on Mr. Kolga's testimony, much of this election interference and disinformation campaigns went back to at least 2014 under the Harper government. In fact, and I would just point people to the Library of Parliament briefing, which we were all given, that clearly states that in January 2019, the federal government announced an action plan to safeguard Canada's elections and democratic institutions in anticipation of the October general election that same year. Since then, elements of the plan have been evaluated and measured, and measures have been improved and renewed for subsequent elections. So it details that the plan has 4 pillars: enhancing citizen preparedness, improving organizational readiness, combating foreign interference, and building a safe information ecosystem. And then it goes into more detail on combating foreign interference. So it's a mischaracterization for anyone to say that the current government has not taken steps to prevent foreign interference. It, in fact, has an action plan, and it set up SITE, which is the Security Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, as well as a G7 rapid response mechanism. And there's more. So I think it's a mischaracterization to say that nothing has been done, and I think it's important to put that on the record. I also agree with Ms. O'Connell when she says, why the focus only on China? I mean, we've heard testimony from CSIS that had indicated that Russia and Iran, it's also in our other briefing documents. I think it's important for us to consider all foreign state actors in terms of interference in our elections, and it would, I think, be important for us to ensure, if we're doing a fulsome study, that we consider all threat actors. So those are a few comments. The last thing I really wanted to say is that I think paragraph B in the motion, so I have no problem with extending the study and having some additional meetings and additional witnesses. I think it's great. I don't see why we needed a 106.4 and a meeting today to determine that, because we could have done that based on consensus quite easily without this meeting, in my opinion. But I do think that, B is problematic, paragraph B, which is to say, based on our good faith agreement to finish 2 other studies, one on hybrid and the other one on the precinct security, that those should be overridden by what's been put forward today. And that I have a real issue with, because we had a good faith agreement on that, and I really don't think it's appropriate for us to now override that. Certainly, I could see a situation where that may happen if something was extremely urgent to the extent that, but in this case, we've already decided to do this study. I think we're already in agreement that we could have some additional witnesses and some additional meetings. So it just doesn't strike me that this should all of a sudden supervene or become the highest priority on our agenda when we had 2 other studies that clearly were priorities before, and we clearly decided to study foreign interference as the 3rd priority. So now we're saying, well, all of a sudden, foreign interference in our elections should be the first priority. Well, we already decided that the priority between those 3 studies would be to complete the 2 that were already started and then to move on to this one. That was a good faith agreement that we had. Members of that side had all agreed to that, so I'm not sure why you would renege on that agreement now. And I think it's important for us to call that out and to actually work through setting our priorities. Okay, so that's all I have to say. I do have other things, but I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Monsieur Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I said earlier, I wanted to hear all of my colleagues from all political parties before I made some amendments to Mr. Cooper's motion. I certainly listened very closely to Mr. Cooper's statements, and I think he will find my suggested amendments quite reasonable.
Just after listening to all the members across the way and hearing my colleagues on this side, I've proposed some amendments to the motion, which I've just sent to the clerk in both official languages. But let me read it out. Je vais les proposer ici. Alors, donnez-moi juste un instant parce que maintenant.
All right, I will move them here. Just a moment, I have to find them here. All right, I move, Madam Chair, that we take out Section B and with regard to the witnesses in C, D, E, and F, up until such time as we have heard them, we will take out G, H, I, J, and K. Amend L as follows. The committee order the production of 1. All relevant notes, memorandums, and pertinent documents that are in the possession of the concerned governments and departments on condition that. Oops, I apologize. I had written 3. The departments responsible for collecting those documents redact some of the documents according to the regulations, and 4, that those documents be produced as quickly as possible to the committee to be distributed to all members of the committee in both official languages.
Madam Chair, I'll repeat this again in English, that what I'm proposing to Mr. Cooper is to delete Section B, to delete until after we hear from witnesses in C, D, E, and F, that we delete G through K, that we amend L in the following manner. L, the committee order the production of 1, all relevant briefing notes, memorandums, and documents which are in possession of the relevant government departments and agencies, provided that 3, the departments and agencies tasked with gathering these documents apply redactions according to the Access to Information and Privacy Act. 4, these redacted documents be deposited as soon as possible with the clerk of the committee to be distributed to all members of the committee in both official languages. So I think I've captured most of what our colleagues have mentioned around the table. I think there's been some give and take on all of this. I think we will get to what we're trying to get at in an expedited and timely manner, but not one which will undo the excellent work and, frankly, the probably 3 meetings or 10 days, calendar days, that are required for us to finish our work on the other 2 studies that have been worked on very assiduously by all members around this table, and certainly by our analysts who have put together an excellent report that we are just at the final stages of considering. So I hope these amendments respects the will around this table, the important will for us to get and to extend our hearings that we currently have, and making sure that we bring forward right people, that leave open the possibility of even going further, depending on what we hear from some of the opening remarks from witnesses. And if necessary, we will go further. So I think, Madam Chair, this is I hope this will be a good statement. And Madam Chair, again, I am not chair, and I'm not being so presumptuous to suggest, but I don't know if perhaps we could profit from a couple of minutes for members to talk to each other and to see if we've found the right way of going forward.
Thank you. So I had Mr. Cooper on the list, and obviously we're debating the
Point of order,
sub-amendment.
Madam Chair.
Mr.
If Mr.
Colkin.
Fergus has provided his amendment to the committee clerk, perhaps the clerk could provide the proposed amendments to the rest of the committee.
I understand that it's been sent around. And there's confirmation that it has been received by members. I'm guessing there's no one wanting to have a quick side conversation. So, Mr.
Juste une question avant qu'on s'en aille.
Just a question before we think about this further. I would just like to know from my colleague why, in his statement, he was withdrawing all of the documents that come from the cabinet and all of the from the Prime Minister's office, the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, of Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, etc. We're not asking any politician to give us an account of what happened with regard to this political interference, and I was wondering why he actually deleted all of the memorandum that came from Cabinet, for example.
Mr. Fergus, Mr. Cooper, do you want to be debating the sub-amendment?
In fact, the point that Mr. Berthold raised was one that I was going to raise as well.
Oh, brilliant.
So,
Perfect. Mr. Fergus.
Alors, merci Luc pour ta question.
Thank you for your question. Two things. Among the witnesses that I would like to invite first, you would see there's Dominique Leblanc, Mélanie Joly. So yes, the politicians that were mentioned in Mr. Cooper's motion remain. I added Ms. Thomas, given her role in terms of national security, to the Prime Minister in the Privy Council office. So I think it's important to mention that. So yes, politicians are represented. You will note as well that I amended I said all relevant briefing notes, memorandums, and documents in the hands of concerned government organizations and agencies. I thought that was a little bit more elegant and perhaps broader than what was mentioned in Mr. Cooper's motion under L2.
Who would like to jump into this question? Oh, there's agreement to have a quick pause. So we will suspend really quickly. We'll be right back. It was a fruitful conversation. We're going to continue with debate on the amendment. Mr. Cooper, I'm just going to make a quick list. Anybody else wanting to join right now? Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and we are prepared to compromise from a scheduling standpoint. The Liberals seem very insistent on completing the two outstanding studies, so we're prepared to get those studies finished. At the same time, we're amenable to shorten the witness list to hear from the witnesses listed in clauses C through F, inclusive of F, and then there will be an opportunity to perhaps call additional witnesses based upon what we learn from the initial witnesses. But the real problem, as I see it right now with the amendments proposed by Mr. Fergus, is with respect to the production of documents. As I read Mr. Fergus's amendment, it guts our production request. The issue is, what does the Prime Minister know and what do ministers know? What were they briefed upon? And what have they done or not done as a result? That is the heart of the issue. Mr. Fergus's amendment completely removes the essence, the heart of what it is that we are seeking to get to in order to get answers and in order to learn the truth. This is not about departmental notes. There is a mountain of departmental notes. The issue is what is in the possession and control of the Prime Minister and ministers. And I wouldn't want to impugn the motives of Mr. Fergus, but it appears on its face that the reason for the amendment and the significant change in wording is an effort on the part of the Liberals to cover up what the Prime Minister knew, what ministers were briefed on, and what they failed to do as a result.
Mr. Fergus.
So thank you very much, Mr. Cooper, and I do appreciate your willingness to, I think, by and large, accept the motions which I propose. And I know that in talking to my colleagues from the other parties, that there might be a sub-amendment or two that might be needed to clarify some things. But I'm also reminded of the old joke. I just wish I could remember which MP had said it. I think it was George Baker once got up, Liberal from Newfoundland and Labrador, and he got up once and he said, "Mr. Speaker, can I call the other member XYZ?" You know, unparliamentary language, and the Speaker got up, "No, you can't do that." And then George Baker said, "Okay," and then sat down. So I know you're not impugning my my motivations, but let me just defend what I'm saying. I don't think I've gutted it at all. Matter of fact, I think I've enhanced it. Prime Minister nor a minister's office or the Prime Minister's office, they're not on the front lines of making determinations on national security. That always comes up. It's legislatively required that it comes up from the different departments or agencies that are concerned with those matters. And so when I put in the motion that we bring in all relevant documentation that comes from all departments and ministries, and bodies responsible for this, I've actually think I've made it more open to understanding what was the information that was being made by cabinet than what was actually being suggested. So it wasn't in any intention of gutting the motion. It was just finding a more elegant way of writing it. So that's behind the motion, and I think members actually will end up getting a fuller picture than what was just described in Mr. Cooper's motion.
Mr. Calkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I guess the spirit of compromise only is working in one direction. Look, the reality is the report from Global News, published by Sam Cooper back in November, specifically listed documents and specifically listed people. These are the same documents and people that appear in the motion that was put before this committee today. Mr. Fergus has argued, not only here in public, but in the little sidebar conversation that we had, about the things that are important to his initiatives. We've compromised on those things. Now he's saying that we don't need the bureaucratic witnesses in G, H, I, J, and K, which are the ones that he's asked us to not consider bringing. No. This is how I'm interpreting what he said.
He's making a point of order.
Okay.
Mr. Calkins, the floor is to Mr. Fergus.
Madam Chair, I would like the member perhaps to provide some proof of the allegation that he's making against me, because that's certainly not the case.
Well,
Mr. Calkins, I hope
I'm entitled to my opinion. My opinion is that the witnesses in C, D, E, and F are political, for the most part, witnesses. The witnesses in G, H, I, J, and K largely are bureaucratic witnesses. So he's asked for the politicians to come, but not with the documents. He's asked for the bureaucrats to not come, but we can bring their documents instead. So we're going to have politicians answering for bureaucrats' documents is basically where this is going to go. I don't agree with it at all. The crux of the matter to me, Madam Chair, is the production of those documents. There is nothing wrong in the language that is in Section L of this motion. And if, as parliamentarians, we have a responsibility, at least in the opposition, to hold the government to account, there are serious allegations in the news report published by Sam Cooper. Intelligence officials informed the Prime Minister and several cabinet ministers in January of 2022 that the Chinese Communist Party actively worked to influence the 2019 federal election. So, I'll go back to the parliament that happened before the 2019 election. This very committee actually had a motion before it to study foreign election interference, and the Liberal majority at the time actually killed it. So now they're in a minority situation and they're scrambling, Madam Chair. And I know what scrambling looks like when I see it. The documents that are being asked for here are going to help parliamentarians actually make a determination as to what the level and extent of the threat and the ability of not only the Chinese Communist Party, but as to Mr. Turnbull's point and Madam McConnell's point, anybody, any foreign state actor that is not working in the best interests of Canada, we need to know as parliamentarians what the actual lay of the land is. Our constituents demand it, and defending our democracy demands that we have this information. I don't know, I just don't know why. It seems, what Liberals seem agreeable, but they are obfuscating getting any results and having this committee get the results and having Parliament and parliamentarians get the information that we need to make an informed decision. So I would actually, you know, if we're not going to come to an agreement on this, we would yield in deleting Clause B, we would yield G, H, I, J, and K, but we will not yield on an amendment in paragraph L or anything to that matter, other than I will work with my colleague from the NDP, who, in my opinion, is reasonable in suggesting that 7 days, it might not be long enough, but I'll have that I'll let her make that argument if she wishes to. But we need to have these documents before Christmas, Madam Chair.
I'm going to once again say that committee members will be leaving me with no choice as to what has to happen shortly after 1 o'clock, because I've been clear about the resources that are available. So with that, we'll go to Mrs. Blaney, then Ms. O'Connell.
So in light of that, I will be brief. I don't have any sub amendments to make to this. We'll just leave it as it is. I do think that we should vote for them separately. It sounds to me like there's a very clear message there that we have 3 different ones, and just something that I would like to provide feedback. And I also want to say that I am concerned. I am concerned about information coming through our committee that could harm us in the future in terms of elections. I'm still not 100% convinced that this is the right place where it should perhaps be at NCCOP, and I'll leave that for people to determine. But I do want to say, regardless of how we vote on this, there's got to be some honesty coming from these ministers before us, because if we don't hear it at this table when they're sitting here in front of us, I think that we'll be able to have some other discussions that might be a little bit harder. So I just want to hopefully have the Liberals share that with their ministers, that we want to know what is happening, and we need to have some level of transparency so our constituents understands what's happening, because we cannot lose faith in our systems, and if there's a problem with our systems, we must fix it immediately.
Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll follow up on what Ms. Blaney just talked about. I agree, there has to be transparency, but what we risk in this forum is providing the same transparency to the foreign state actors we want to prevent to having this information. This is precisely why we created NCCOP. It's now why we have an agreement with the parties to create a system to review redacted documents for people that have the right security clearance. So the suggestion that we have to produce these documents or they have to be done a certain way, well, is this, not to Ms. Blaney's point, but...
Point of order, Madam Chair. Sorry to interrupt, but I do see we're getting close to 1 o'clock. I would just note that at 1 o'clock there's not the consent of the committee to adjourn at 1, but perhaps foreshadowing that this discussion will probably not wrap up in the next 30 seconds. Perhaps as a compromise, we could resume tomorrow during a regular committee slot with this meeting. So potentially suspend until tomorrow at 11 o'clock, resume this meeting during our normal spot, and then potentially adjourn to the subcommittee if there's time tomorrow.
Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. Well, if you're going to rule to adjourn, then I'd just like to have my spot continued in this order, and I'd like to continue speaking, but I'll go as long until you cut me off, or until I'm finished. But Madam Chair, I just think that the issue is, again, not around continuing the study. The issue is around handling the documents with care. And in the past, Conservatives have not cared about maintaining national security protections. I think Ms. Blaney's comments are exactly right. Like, we want this information, but you don't want it also in the hands of the people who want it most, to be quite honest. And so there needs to be a way to have all parties who have the proper clearance be able to have this information, but doing it in the open forum is actually counterproductive to the very real issues of foreign interference. So I think the point about witnesses and things like that, committees determine witnesses based on, every study is based on how committees move forward and bring forward their witnesses. I don't see why the Conservatives in this are focused on predetermining and boxing this committee into specific witnesses at this time. And what Mr. Fergus said, what I heard clearly, and I may be paraphrasing because I didn't write it down, but what I heard clearly is that he said, let's hear from these first witnesses in C through F, and then let's determine who the next round of witnesses should be or would be. So the suggestion by Mr. Calkins that, you know, it's politicians answering for bureaucrats, absolutely not. That was never the suggestion. It was, let's hear the testimony and see where that goes, and then as a committee determine who would be best to bring forward next. I don't think it's anybody's interest in this committee, with the limited hours and resources that we have, to box ourselves in not being able to open it up to the type of testimony that we need. So I think the assertions are completely inaccurate based on the conversations that have happened here in terms of ensuring that we have the ability to call further witnesses. Subcommittee is something that can look at that, and the regular process of each party determining and putting forward their best set of witnesses. And again, I think if we're willing to open and talk about how best to handle these documents, I don't think Mr. Fergus's amendment did anything to actually limit. He said all relevant information. At the end of the day, these documents are not owned by ministers' offices. They're owned by the departments who produce them. And so his motion did nothing to restrict. In fact, as he said, it was probably made it more broad to what is relevant within the determination of this motion. So I worry, if we're going to have a serious conversation about foreign interference, the safety of our democratic institutions, we need to be very honest about intentions here. If this is just an attempt by Conservatives to get redacted documents and then go, oh, look, Canadians, like they're hiding something. Mr. Cooper said that the government has done nothing, that the Prime Minister has done nothing. He has no basis to make such a suggestion. He's never seen the documents, and the information he has seen in the public sector or in the public realm are all things that we've put in place. Our government put in place the panel that discusses foreign interference during elections. Our government put in place a site committee that actually provides all parties with information. There's this notion that, you know, Canadians want to know, and how do candidates protect themselves? I mean, that is very real concerns. You look on CSIS's website, CSE's website, they provide information on how to Canadians and political parties to protect themselves and what to look out for. So there is information out there, and I think we should talk about it. I think more Canadians should be thinking about cybersecurity, and political institutions need to ensure that we're protecting ourselves. But I also think it's really important that attempts at influencing our elections do not actually necessarily mean they were successful. And that's the point of the nonpartisan panel, to make that determination so that it's not political when one political party over the other may have a reason to benefit in that particular instance, because it's right that all parties are targeted. So I think it's really, really important, if we're going to have these conversations, that the worst thing we can do is like these ridiculous gotcha moments when it comes to producing national security documentation and the handling of it. It's not to say the information shouldn't be available, but the handling of it has to be done in a secure, safe way so that we're not providing it to those very actors who would love to have this info. So, Madam Chair, I don't know where we're going to go in terms of the back and forth and figuring this out, but I think the handling of these documents are important and worth continuing that conversation, make sure the information is there, but is done so in a way that protects our national security.
Madame Goudreau.
Oui, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make the following request. We've shown in our committee that we are able to move forward And I see that we have a few minutes at our disposal, and I would like to thank the interpreters and all of the other people who work for us. I leave it in your hands to make the right decision. We have 5 weeks to go until Christmas, and we have a lot of work during that time as well as after the Christmas break, and I leave it in your capable hands and to suggest something to us. Mr. Berthold, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would just like to be very clear on what is going on right now. We are having a very interesting discussion among parties. We're trying to find a way to get the answers to the questions that we all have, not just the opposition parties and party in power, but Canadians have, especially in light of the article that appeared on the 7th of November in Global News. I mean, there's some people who may not have seen that article, but I would like to say that there are people watching, and we want to make sure that we are not going to be obstinate here. We really do want to make progress. We want to set the record straight. We want to move forward in this. There was a motion tabled by the Liberals that led us to change our position. We don't agree on everything. And just because we don't agree on everything, you want to force a vote on an amendment that doesn't work, but we are actually just in discussion mode. The opposition parties have shown a real openness to move forward. We're being sincere in that. We want to shed some light on these very serious events that occurred during the elections of 2019, whereby a foreign regime deliberately organized, made donations, and directly wanted to influence the election results here in Canada. And in the article, it says that 11 candidates were directly targeted. And I think that it is in the best interest of all Canadians to know exactly what the Prime Minister and the ministers concerned by this motion and Cabinet knew. That will be done if we have access to the documents we have requested and if we impose a deadline for receipt of those documents. Unfortunately, if we move too fast with a vote, then we may create a little upset among committee members here. I think that we have to continue discussing this and once again try to convince the Liberal Party that we are not prepared to make sure that this is a priority study over the two others. That is one major concession. We are ready to withdraw half of the names of the witnesses that we want to call. Well, yes, that is a compromise. And what I want people to understand is that we want to know what the ministers and cabinet knew about the situation. That is what we are asking for in our motion, Madam Chair. So I think that is proof of a great deal of openness. I don't want to be painted in a poor light here. We want answers. We want it for Canadians. We want it for the voters who go to the polls. They want some assurance there isn't any interference from foreign governments. In this case, it's the Chinese regime. We don't want them to be able to interfere in their choice of representative. We owe it to Canadians of Chinese origin who can exercise their right to vote without any foreign interference. And we want to be able to give that assurance, and we can do so only if we have all of the information and if we can share that information. The other important point, Madam Chair, is that we can't ask questions when it's a question of this amplitude to determine what is good and what isn't good. We're talking about a basic right here, the right to vote. And Madam Chair, if you look at my colleague here who's raised her hand, she wants to have the floor, and I can assure her that I will give her the floor shortly. But what I do want to say in closing is that when it comes to elections, if there is one area where transparency must be general or paramount, or if the first reflex has to be transparency, it's clearly elections, because that's at the heart of our system, that's at the heart of democracy. And if we start hiding non-relevant information to Canadians with regard to the way foreign countries interfered in our elections, then we've just undermined the confidence of Canadians in the parliamentary and democratic process. For that reason, I'm asking the committee to take into consideration all of the concessions that we have made. We want to move forward, but we want to do so in a manner that would allow all Canadians to have access to information they need.
To my colleague, I was just trying to get the chair's attention. I wasn't trying to disrupt your. Well, my perspective is we just need to call this to vote. I really heard very clearly that we only have a few weeks left. We need to get on this study. We need to make sure that it's done. So I just hope that you will call the vote so that we can get this done, and tomorrow have our subcommittee meet with a good strategy to make sure that this is a study that's a priority.
Mr. Turnbull.
I just wanted to suggest one very small sub-amendment, which is to the documents be deposited. It says within 1 week. I don't think that that's actually possible. Could we just agree that as soon as possible, but not to exceed 30 days, would be more reasonable and actually be feasible, and I think that would be more reasonable.
So currently we are debating the amendment, and there is no mention of that period of time in the amendment. So therefore, you are trying to amend the motion, and so therefore we have to deal with the sub-amendment. I mean, with the amendment first.
I think the sub-amendment, or yes, it's a sub-amendment.
The amendment to the motion does not have mention of the time frame. So therefore, you are trying to amend the motion, not the amendment. We are currently on the amendment. Do you want to change that, or do you know what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying, yeah. So that's fine.
We'll wait till we're done with the amendment.
Sure.
Mr. Nader.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and perhaps in an effort to move things along, I could offer a sub-amendment to the amendment. And what I would propose is that when we're dealing with the sub-amendment, that everything after the words G through K be deleted. So that would have the effect of, on the main motion, it would remove the prioritization part of B. It would remove the additional witnesses G through K, but would keep the production of documents in there. And you can't sub-amend something. You'd have to deal with the amendments, but perhaps if people are willing to keep our sub-amendment that I've just proposed, we could perhaps look at a way to change the timeline to 14 days, or as soon as possible, or within 14 days. So that would be the effect of what I'm proposing, is that we compromise on the first part, take out the prioritization one, take out the additional witnesses, but keep the production of papers, of documents as is, but with the understanding that when we get to the point that we can then amend that, we can change the timeline. So that's what I offer is a hopeful compromise and solution that maybe our colleagues would be willing to accept. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Fergus, then Ms. O'Connell.
Call to a vote then on the sub-amendment?
Madam
Ms.
Chair, mine's just a
O'Connell.
procedural issue. You can't, and correct me if I'm wrong to the clerk of what was just proposed, but you can't provide a sub-amendment which is the exact amendment that's already been proposed. Like eliminating B and G through K was Mr. Fergus's motion. So can we get clear on what's being proposed? And then if the Conservatives are moving an additional, they want to amend his amendment, then we need to be very clear on what we're voting on, because they just moved the exact amendment that was already moved as a sub-amendment. So I think can we just get clear on what we're actually voting on? Because it's...
The sub-amendment that Mr. Nader is proposing is to remove B, as Mr. Fergus had mentioned, but then also remove G, H, I, J, K, and to keep L.
Yeah, so basically what I'm doing is I'm proposing to amend Mr. Fergus's amendment by dropping the second part of his amendment.
Dropping, okay,
That's
perfect.
so the effect of that is keeping L.
Yeah.
That's the effect.
Okay, I think the hardest part of it is just following what we're doing. So I am calling the question to the sub-amendment that proposed by Mr. Nader, and you will record the vote. We will go through the table.
Madam Chair, the question is on Mr. Nader's sub-amendment. Mr. Fergus.
Je vote contre.
Ms. O'Connell. No. Madame Romanado.
Against?
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Against.
Mr. Turnbull.
Against.
Monsieur Berthold.
Pour.
Mr. Calkins.
Or
Mr. Cooper.
For.
Mr. Nader.
In favor?
Madame Gaudreau.
Pour.
Ms. Blaney.
Against.
Madam Chair, the sub-amendment is defeated 5-6.
I am now calling the question on Mr. Fergus's amendment. Clerk?
Madam Chair, the question is on Mr. Fergus's amendment. Monsieur Fergus.
Je vote en faveur.
Madame O'Connell.
In favor?
Madame Romanado.
In favor?
Ms. Vandenbeld.
In favor.
Mr. Turnbull.
In favor.
Monsieur Berthold.
Contre.
Mr. Calkins.
against.
Mr. Cooper.
Against.
Mr. Nader.
Against.
Madame Gaudreau.
Contre.
Ms. Blaney.
In favor.
Madam Chair, the amendment is passed 6-5.
I now call the question on the main motion. Mr. Clerk,
Chair?
I've called the question.
No, there has to be debate on the. We're back on the debate on the main motion now.
I just called the question. I didn't have a speaking list, and you've seen the paces traveling.
You never offered one.
Mr. Clerk, I don't have to. If there's a
He-
speaking
he
list, I would
was-
respect the speaking list. I
I
have
saw
called
him
the
asking
question.
for the floor before
Mr.
you
Clerk,
asking the question.
call.
I saw him. Mr. Point of order. Madame la
The
Présidente,
question
j'ai
has been
vu.
called.
J'ai vu.
Madam Chair, I saw Mr. Fergus ask for the floor before you called the motion. So, Madam Chair, With all due respect, I think you should recognize Mr. Nader, who asked for the floor before you called the question. He had raised his hand. It's not Mr. Nader's fault. We do have to have a debate on the main motion that has been changed with Mr. Fergus's amendment. We can't immediately vote on this without giving Mr. Nader the chance to speak. Furthermore, I asked to take the floor before you called the question. It's a question of having the floor. We have to rely on the good faith of parliamentarians. I would like to reiterate that, in all honesty, that Mr. Nader asked to have the floor before you called the question.
Mr. Nader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So now we're on the main motion as amended, and I would make an amendment that would say these redacted documents be deposited as soon as possible, and then add, but no later than 14 days, and then carry on with the clerk of the committee to be distributed to all members of the committee in both official languages. And I just think that's putting a timeline on it. That's the extent of my intervention.
I'll be equally as brief, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a sub-amendment to Mr. Nader's amendment to replace the word 15 with 30.
So instead of 14 days.
Excuse me, replace 14 with 30.
30.
3-0. I think it stands to reason, and that's what was talked about amongst colleagues beforehand.
Okay. I'm going to call the question to the sub-amendment. Mr. Clerk. Mr. Fergus's sub-amendment.
The question is on Mr. Fergus's sub-amendment. Mr. Fergus.
Je vote en faveur.
Ms. O'Connell.
Yes.
Madame Romanado.
In favor.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
In favor.
Mr. Turnbull.
In favor.
Monsieur Berthold.
Contre.
Mr. Calkins.
Against.
Mr. Cooper.
Against.
Mr. Nader.
Against.
Madame Gaudreau.
Contre.
Ms. Blaney.
Against.
Madam Chair, sub-amendment defeated, 5-6.
I can now call the question on the motion as amended, as sub-amended.
The amendment.
On the amendment of Mr. Clerk.
The question is on Mr. Nader's amendment. Monsieur Fergus.
Je vote contre.
Ms. O'Connell.
No.
Madame Romanado.
No.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
Against.
Mr. Turnbull.
Nay.
Monsieur Berthold.
Oh.
Mr. Calkins.
In favor.
Mr. Cooper.
In favor.
Mr. Nader.
In favor.
Madame Gaudreau.
Pour.
Ms. Blaney.
In favor.
Madam Chair, amendment carries 6-5.
Now we're on the motion as amended. Now we're on the motion as amended or sub-amended. We will now call the question on the motion as amended, Mr. Chair. Mr. Clerk.
Monsieur Fergus.
Je vote pour.
Ms. O'Connell.
Yes.
Madame Romanado.
Yes.
Ms. Vandenbeld.
In favor.
Mr. Turnbull.
In favor.
Monsieur Berthold.
Against.
Mr. Calkins,
Contre.
Mr. Cooper,
Against.
Mr. Nader,
Against.
Madame Gaudreau,
Contre.
Ms. Blaney.
For.
Madam Chair, motion as amendment carries 5-6.
Okay, so I will say thank you. That's everything's voted on. Everything's good. We will be having a subcommittee tomorrow. It appears you have received the draft report for the precinct, which we will continue. So the motion that we have passed today is adding a few names. A lot of them are names that were already on the list for the foreign interference study. So my understanding is correct, just so the clerk and I know, the names that we've already submitted, plus the names that have been added through this motion, is who we will slot in to having meetings on foreign election interference. Madame Blaney?
I think priority on the list that we had today.
Okay. Fair. Perfect. With that, have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow. So, well, some people tomorrow.